Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 12 about the Georgia Constitution. It's Lesson 14 about Georgia taxation. In this lesson, you'll learn about the power to tax, you'll learn about the types of taxes, you'll learn about taxation for schools, and you'll learn about the lottery. In this series of lessons, we've been going through the Constitution of the state of Georgia, article by article. In this lesson, we'll focus on Article 7 about taxation and finance, although we'll look at a couple of things from other articles that are relevant to this topic. The first thing to note is the broad taxing power that is claimed by the state under the state constitution. Here it says that the right to tax shall always be under complete state control. And at the beginning of this quote, it talks about that this power cannot be suspended or given up or granted or limited in any way. Essentially, the Georgia Constitution allows the government of the state of Georgia to claim the power to tax its citizens almost every way that it possibly can. Now, this doesn't mean, though, that Georgia is necessarily aggressively overtaxing its citizens. What is happening here is Georgia is claiming the ability to tax every way that it can, as compared to some other states who decline to use certain methods of taxation. For example, the map on the left, it shows states that do not have an income tax. The map on the right shows states that do not have a sales tax. Georgia doesn't just decline to use a method of taxation available to it. Instead, it uses them all. Now, when you total all that up, the amount of taxes that Georgia collects are sort of middle of the pack compared to the rest of the country. Georgia's not particularly a tax-friendly state, nor is it a harshly taxing state. It's somewhere in the middle. But it stays in the middle by using each of the methods that's available to it, even though it may not take those individual methods to the extreme. Well, as I talk about Georgia using a variety of methods of taxation, what am I talking about? Well, there are three big methods that a state government can use, and Georgia uses them all. The first is the income tax. An income tax is a charge that the government places on money that somebody has earned, like when they get a paycheck, or maybe they make an investment, or something like that, and they receive income in return. The state of Georgia takes a chunk of that. This income tax that the state of Georgia collects accounts for about half of the revenue that they receive each year. This is their biggest tax maker, the income tax. I should say revenue maker, the income tax. The income tax in the state of Georgia is about 6% for most of the income that people earn. It starts lower at very low levels of income, but by the time you're making several $1,000s, you're paying 6%. So just about anybody with a job that's more than a couple hours a week is going to end up paying in the 6% category when they do their income taxes. The second form of taxation used by the state of Georgia is called the sales tax. A sales tax is a charge that the government places on a purchase of some item. Georgia gets about 40% of its revenue from sales tax. So they get nearly half of it from income tax and about 40% from sales tax. So between those two kinds of taxes, that's where most of the revenue for the state government comes from. The sales tax varies different places in the state. There's a baseline of 4% that the state collects, and then localities can add their own additional taxes on top of that, so that those taxes can be kept for the city, for example, where those extra taxes are imposed. The third primary form of taxation that is used by the state of Georgia is called property tax. Property tax is a charge that the government makes on the ownership of property. Usually this is collected annually. Now think about this. What kind of things can a government collect property tax on? Well, it's got to be something that's sitting around that they can keep an eye on and see if you're actually going to use it. So really it's generally placed on real property, like a piece of land or a building that's not going to get up and move. In the past, Georgia has also collected tax on automobiles. that was a property tax, but they've switched over to essentially a sales tax on automobiles now. Now, when I talked about where the state of Georgia was getting most of its money, it was coming from income tax and sales tax. So why collect property tax? Well, the property tax is primarily not going to the state government, but is instead going to local governments to support things like schools through the school tax. So property tax in the state of Georgia is primarily collected by local governments for local use, like with schools. The average property tax rate paid by somebody in the state of Georgia is less than 1%. Now, that may not seem like much, but when you get to the kind of prices that homes are bought and sold for, when you have to pay each year somewhere around 1% of that value, that's actually potentially quite a bit. All right, the last form of revenue that we want to discuss in this lesson that the state gets is through the lottery. Now, in case you don't know, lottery is a form of gambling where people select numbers, and then if those numbers turn up, then they can get a big payday. In the state constitution, all lotteries are prohibited in the state. Matter of fact, any sort of gambling is, with the exception that the General Assembly can set up a lottery operation if it wants to. The proceeds from the state lottery are then used to fund educational programs in the state. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of that in the next lesson. All right, let's review what we learned in this lesson. What tax source does Georgia not use? Do they not collect income tax, or not collect sales tax, or not collect property tax, or does Georgia use all of them? Georgia actually uses all three of these major methods of taxing. From what tax does Georgia get the most revenue? Does it get the most revenue from income tax, from sales tax, from property tax, or from the lottery? Georgia gets most of its revenue from income tax. What kind of tax is collected locally to help fund schools? Is that income tax? Is that sales tax? Is it property tax? Or is it a tax on gas? The kind of tax that is collected locally to fund schools is the property tax. What are lottery revenues used for? Are they used to build roads, to help out with sports teams, to fund education, or to provide health care for the citizens of Georgia? Lottery revenues are explicitly set aside to assist with education. All right, that completes this lesson and actually provides a nice tie-in. The next lesson, which will also be from Unit 12, will be Lesson 15, and it'll be about Georgia education.